High above the city, a helicopter hovered, its camera capturing the devastation unfolding below. Streets once alive with motion now lay in ruin, carved apart by the savage onslaught of magic beasts. Among the chaos, a massive naga lunged forward, its jaws unhinged in a predatory roar, only to be stopped mid-flight by a strike so fast it blurred through the air. Suho's flying kick connected sharply with the beast's jaw, the impact reverberating through the air. Without hesitation, he followed through, spinning mid-air to deliver a crushing blow to the back of its head. The naga's eyes bulged wide, its jaw shattered, and its colossal body collapsed lifelessly to the ground. Suho stood amidst the wreckage. A quiet thought crossed his mind. He had felled them all with a single strike. The realization sent a chill through him. His power had grown beyond his own comprehension, leaving him uncertain of its true extent. Not far from him, a D-rank hunter fought with renewed vigor. Clad in the black armor granted by Suho's shadows, the man moved with surprising agility, his strikes clean and confident. The armor pulsed faintly with dark energy, each motion enhancing his speed and strength. For the first time, the hunter felt his body lighter, empowered enough to stand his ground against monsters that once terrified him. Watching him, Suho felt a flicker of reassurance. The man fought well, there was no need for intervention. It became evident that the shadow-crafted armor amplified a hunter's abilities, heightening their physical and magical potential alike. Lifting his hand, Suho invoked his will. The word resonated within him, arise. Instantly, the shadows of the fallen stirred. Dark tendrils seeped from the corpses, twisting and coiling until they reshaped into soldiers clad in black mist, ready to serve their master. This was the gift of his new power, shadow creation. It was more than a skill, it was an extension of his will itself. Through it, he could draw upon the lingering essence of his shadow soldiers to reconstruct items, armor, or weapons. Each creation began as information extracted from the shadow's memories, then reassembled, refined, and reborn into the precise form he desired. System notifications blinked rapidly before Suho's eyes, each message marking another reward from the fallen naga. He had gained the Naga warrior's gauntlet, armor, and belt, each piece resonating faintly with mana. As he equipped them, a surge of strength coursed through him, his attack and defense rising with measurable force. Yet even amid victory, Suho's thoughts turned inward. The grades of the items varied. The armor he envisioned had manifested as rare, while the gauntlet he had forced into existence was merely common. The inconsistency puzzled him. It became clear that the quality of his creations depended on the materials he used. To forge stronger items, he would need more powerful shadows. Since his job change, he had finally gained the ability to store shadows, but his new goal demanded more. To unlock the true potential of his contract skill, he would need a shadow item of hero grade or higher. As he contemplated the meaning of his job title, his thoughts were shattered by a sudden tremor. The surviving naga beasts lunged forward in a frenzied charge, their howls echoing through the ruined streets. Before Suho could react, a shadow cut across the skyline. A figure dropped from the top of a nearby building, landing squarely atop one of the beasts. The creature's skull was crushed beneath the impact. The ground split open from the force, concrete shattering outward as dust and debris filled the air. Suho halted mid-step, his gaze locked on the man who had just descended. It was Dojin, the newly risen S-rank hunter. He stood calmly amidst the carnage, his presence radiating quiet dominance. Without hesitation, he invoked his power. Mana surged around his arm as his skilled amplification took effect. Energy spiraled violently around his fist, condensing to a point that shimmered brighter than light itself. Then, with one motion, he struck. The shockwave tore through the air, erasing the charging naga in an instant. The earth trembled from the aftershock, leaving behind nothing but silence and the stench of dissipating mana. Suho and the surrounding hunters could only stare in astonishment. The man had annihilated every beast with a single blow. For a moment, awe replaced fear, proof of the overwhelming might of an S-rank. Cameras mounted on drones and rooftops captured everything. The meeting of two extraordinary figures amid chaos. Suho's calm composure contrasted sharply with Dojin's fierce aura. Their brief exchange of glances was enough to ignite curiosity across the nation. At the Hunter Association, the live broadcast streamed across every screen. Jinho leaned forward, disbelief melting into raw relief as he spotted Suho alive. Emotion overtook him as he shouted at the screen, half angry, half joyous that his nephew had returned without warning. Beside him, Jimchul exhaled slowly, his tension fading into quiet relief. But before the calm could settle, a shrill tone broke through the moment. Jimchul's phone vibrated with an urgent call from the Hunters Guild. Jongen's voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and urgency as he pointed out the masked figure on the screen. He recognized the black mask immediately and connected it to the night he had encountered Lee Min-sung. Lim Taegyu sprang into action, certain of what he saw. He moved to place calls, his brow tight with accusation and resolve, convinced that Suho was the man he suspected, a criminal tied to the Stardust scandal and the murderer of Lee Min-sung. He instructed the association to prepare for a restraint and extraction, believing forceful measures necessary. Jimchul pushed back, alarmed at the rush to judgment. He argued for restraint, insisting the association association lacked concrete evidence tying Sung Suho to criminal acts. His caution cut through the room, but Taegyu's certainty only hardened. To him, the mask and the connections were proof enough. Youngin, watching the feed and thinking of loyalties and reputations, took a different tack. He refused to brand Hunter Sung Suho as irredeemable. Still, Youngin pressed for a formal process. Suho should be brought in and investigated by the association. He reminded the others of Suho's ties. Suho was the nephew of President Yu Jinho, a man close to the head of the Hunters Association, and he urged the association leaders to act justly and carefully. After a brief, heated debate, a decision was reached and an order was sent. Park Dojin's phone buzzed on his hip. He answered with crisp formality, confirming that the target was in plain sight and under his watch. From Suho's vantage point on the battlefield, Dojin's presence registered as a calm, controlled force. Suho recognized the name, Park Dojin, the newly minted S-rank hunter, and noted, with a quick inward flicker of unease, the smile Dojin wore as if the encounter were a matter of routine. The call from the Hunter Association's leadership ended, and Dojin relayed the message to Suho with professional steadiness. He identified the summons. The Grim Reaper Guildmaster had ordered Suho to be brought before the association. Suho's mind registered the unexpected designation with a dry, incredulous thought. He had not come to be scouted. Dojin's tone shifted to accusation as he outlined the charges. Suho was wanted for the murder of Vice Guildmaster Lee Min-sung and for involvement in the distribution of Stardust. The words landed like a physical blow. Suho's eyes widened at the declaration, surprise and the cold realization of how he now appeared to the world flashing across his face. Dojin closed with a final, measured plea that avoided escalation. It would be best if Suho accompanied him without resistance. The sound of boots striking concrete filled the air as several hunters rushed toward the confrontation. Their voices carried urgency and protest. They had witnessed what Suho had done, how he had saved them. To them, this sudden attempt to detain him felt unjust. They called out in defense, insisting that Suho had been their ally, not their enemy, and that such treatment of him was tyranny. Suho, however, met their concern with quiet composure. He stepped forward, signaling them to stand down. His tone was calm but firm, his expression steady as he assured them that he would go willingly. Gratitude softened his gaze as he acknowledged their support. He explained that he had intended to visit the association on his own regardless. And so, this encounter merely hastened what was inevitable. Dojin nodded slightly, accepting Suho's words with restrained satisfaction. To him, cooperation was simpler than conflict. Among the hunters, one of the D-rank survivors spoke softly, his voice tinged with respect. He remarked how generous Suho had been, even granting them shadow-forged armor in the heat of battle. But Suho had already turned his focus elsewhere. The black armor that had adorned the hunters dissolved into mist and streamed back toward him. Now, 40 shadows rested within his grasp, a formidable force ready to be called upon at will. Suho noted with quiet satisfaction that the burden of managing them had become far smoother since his new ability to store them directly. From a short distance, Dojin observed him in silence. His sharp gaze studied every flicker of energy surrounding Suho. There was something unmistakably different about him, an aura too refined, too powerful, as if Suho had transcended ordinary growth. Dojin's thoughts turned calculating. Whatever transformation Suho had undergone had reduced the effectiveness of the star fragment, the experimental substance meant to convert elite hunters into loyal believers. If they were to succeed in their designs, the fragment would need to evolve. For now, he decided he would remain close to Suho, watching, waiting. Their moment of uneasy calm was broken by the sharp buzz of an alert spreading across every device. The hunters paused as their phones vibrated with synchronized urgency, a disaster warning. Confusion rippled through the group as they read the details aloud. The Jisun Correctional Facility, a prison designed specifically to contain awakened criminals of the highest danger, was in chaos. There had been a massive breakout, and among the many words flashing across the screen, one name cut through everything else: Stardust. That single word froze Suho in place. His eyes darkened, his expression tightening as the implications sank in. Breaking his silence, he declared his intent with quiet determination. They could not allow the escapees to roam free. But Dojin, calm and unmoved, countered with logic. The association had already dispatched hunters. Suho's presence was unnecessary. Suho, however, did not waver. His voice carried quiet certainty as he reasoned that if the fugitives had consumed Stardust, ordinary hunters would stand no chance. Dojin's warning hung in the air, heavy with authority. If Suho refused to go to the association, trouble would follow. Suho met that risk with calm defiance, accepting consequence as currency. He activated his bond skill. The change was instantaneous and uncanny. His hair slicked into a stark white sheen, and an aura like midnight steel unfurled around him. Cold, absolute, and impossible to ignore. In a single motion, he vanished from sight, leaving only the imprint of where he had stood. Dojin watched the place where Suho had been and allowed himself the briefest of smiles. The hunter reasoned that failure to detain Suho was not a loss, but an opportunity. He would keep a close watch and measure just how far the newcomer had advanced. Far off, alarms screamed as the Jisan Correctional Facility descended into chaos. Red lights swept across the skyline, and emergency emergency broadcasts poured through radios and phones. Flames licked the prison walls, and the scorching heat fractured concrete into jagged veins. Cracks raced outward as structural fury answered the breakout. Inside the prison, anger that had been smoldering for years ignited into raw vocal fury. Hwang Dong-suk walked among the convicts with the swagger of someone who believed himself justified. He bitterly recited the cruelty the inmates had endured, manhwa stones forced into their necks as instruments of execution, their newfound powers branded as crimes instead of miracles after the cataclysm. Their resentment had turned into a promise, revenge on the Hunters Association that had locked them away. Dong-suk rallied the scattered awakened, inciting those ranked from B down to D to break the seals and vent their pent-up rage. Hundreds answered his call, and the prison swelled with the sound of doors being torn from hinges and barriers shattered by desperate, furious hands. The facility had become a dungeon breach in the truest sense. Organized, violent, and unstoppable. News channels swamped the airwaves with identical headlines. A massive prison break at Jisan, urgent evacuation orders for nearby civilians, and desperate pleas to follow the instructions of hunters on the scene. Not everyone had time to heed the warnings. In a quiet residential block, the fragile boundary between ordinary life and cataclysm shattered when a band of fugitives targeted an apartment. They forced the door clean from its hinges, turning a mundane home into the first culpable scene of the breakout spread. They moved through the apartment complex like predators in stolen skins, swapping prison uniforms for civilian clothes with efficient, practiced hands. One of the fugitives noted the emptiness of the unit and shrugged it off as a resident who'd fled at the alarm. Fear and haste were easier explanations than conscience. Within their ragged group, plans were traded like contraband. Hwang Dong-suk had convinced them that the Hunters Association could be toppled if they first seized the city and took hostages. S-ranks were formidable, but unreachable when the populace and infrastructure were held as leverage. They believed in the star fragment Dong-suk had smuggled to them. To the fugitives, it was not a contraband drug, but a symbol, proof that authority feared the diffusion of power. Rumors that branded the fragment illegal were taken as evidence of the association's insecurity, not of the fragment's danger. Greed and urgency tangled with ideology. As some argued strategy, others treated the raid like a raid. Liquor cabinets were pried open, goods looted, and petty calculations about worth and speed punctuated the violence. Laughter and crude complaints bubbled alongside the harsher instincts. Steal now, leave fast, avoid the hunters, while a few voices argued the moral high ground. A child pressed into the shadows of a wardrobe recorded everything on a trembling phone. The boy's wide eyes reflected the flicker of flame and the flicker of faces as he planned to send the evidence to anyone who would listen. The moment his message left his outstretched hand, the door was thrown open, a fugitive's gaze cut cold and direct through the threshold, fixing on the hidden witness. The danger was not confined to a single apartment. The city itself had become an inferno. Prisoners flowed into the streets like spilled oil, and with every step they left a trail of death and arson. Civilians were struck down in the open. Shops and cars became pyres. Low-ranking hunters, trained but outmatched by anger and numbers, fell beneath coordinated assaults. The riot spread with deliberate cruelty, turning neighborhoods into battlegrounds where ordinary life could not survive. Above the chaos, Dong-suk crowned himself king of the ruin. He stood on a mound of overturned concrete and burning debris, savoring the spectacle as a man tasting his own legend. He believed his power to be absolute. A single command from him amplified the violence below, and even the higher-ranked inmates obeyed and escalated the chaos in proof of his authority. Kang Tae-shek urged action, practical, impatient, aware that momentum could be lost and that their coup required movement, not spectacle. But Dong-suk answered with scorn, deriding Tae-shek's position and reminding him of their hierarchy. Tae-shek's voice remained level as he met Dong-suk's rage. He clarified with icy precision that he was not a subordinate of Dong-suk's younger brother, but a man under commission, sent specifically to extract Dong-suk, a C-rank awakener, and escort him overseas. The mission was simple, the arrangement professional, yet his composure only fueled Dong-suk's fury. In one sharp motion, Dong-suk seized Tae-shek by the collar, his face twisted with indignation. He demanded respect, his pride wounded by the implication of inferiority. Tae-shek's silence only deepened the tension. The grip tightened as Dong-suk accused him of looking down on him, invoking the difference in their ranks. A difference that, in this burning city, mattered less than the arrogance with which Dong-suk carried himself. Inside, Tae-shek's thoughts turned sharp and disdainful. He knew what kind of man stood before him, all bluster and resentment, a coward too afraid to consume the star fragment that had granted the others their volatile power. Dong-suk postured as a leader, but fear anchored him. Tae-shek's memory flickered back to the orders he had received from Dong-suk's younger brother, Hwang Dong-soo, the true S-rank. Dong-soo's words had been cold and unbending. He cared little for the uprising or the Hunters Association. The riot was nothing but noise, a convenient cover. The only task that mattered was Dong-suk's retrieval. Kang had been warned plainly. Success was expected. Failure would have consequences severe enough to make him regret survival. Dragged back to the present by Dong-suk's impatient snarl, Tae-shek hid his contempt beneath a pliant expression. He could not afford to turn an S rank into an enemy, especially one as unpredictable as Dongsoo. For now, compliance was the only intelligent move. He agreed with a forced calmness, promising to guide Dongsuk as he wished, while silently calculating how best to complete his mission without provoking another outburst. Elsewhere, the Hunter Association was already in motion. The echo of rotors thudded through the air as helicopters lined the headquarters roof, engines flaring against the crimson horizon. Hunters prepared for deployment, their armor clinking faintly against the steel platforms as the urgency of the situation pressed down on every soul present. Yongin stepped up beside Jimchul, the weight of the coming battle evident in his voice. He remarked that it had been the first time since the cataclysm that they would fight together again, onto a grim reunion forged in chaos. Jimchul's expression was resolute. He could not stand idle while civilians perished. Duty burned in his tone as he gave the signal for immediate departure. Jongin's next question struck to the core of the disaster. What had become of the restraints placed on the inmates? Jimchul's reply was bleak. The prison's administration center had been annihilated, all security systems destroyed. Nearby association hunters who had attempted to intervene had been ambushed by unknown forces. Many now lay unconscious, others in critical condition. Jongin's face hardened as he processed the scale of what they faced. The prison's administration center had been fortified with A-rank personnel, and yet it had fallen in a single coordinated strike. There was no mistaking the implications. Someone powerful was moving behind the scenes. Lim Taegyu's conviction settled over the war room like a verdict. He saw a ringleader behind the Jisun breakout and spoke with the certainty of a man who had found the final piece of a puzzle. Jongin acknowledged Taegyu's cooperation with dry formality, while the room's mood shifted from confusion to accusation as the names and actions were stitched into a narrative of guilt. Taegyu pointed to the pattern he believed undeniable. Song Suho had refused the association's summons and then declared he would go to Jisun prison. To Taegyu, that journey was hardly noble. He interpreted it as a deliberate march into the heart of villainy, a confession dressed as heroism. He argued that Suho's masked appearances and sudden revelation of strength served as cover for deeper crimes, the distribution of the star fragment, and even the murder of Lee Min-sung. In Taegyu's view, Suho's hidden rank and secretive behavior marked him as a false ranker and a dangerous hunter who must be exterminated. Jimchul's shock cut through the accusations. He refused to accept conjecture as proof and demanded caution. Jongin, however, framed their dilemma with blunt practicality. Suho had vanished, then reappeared, then declined a formal summons in order to head to Jisan, behavior that defied explanation. When actions could not be understood, the safest path was to treat Suho as hostile until proven otherwise. Park Dojin watched all of it with a calm that masked calculation. From his vantage on the ground, the situation felt too volatile to confront head-on. The presence of multiple S-rank threats made a direct clash reckless. He considered that Sung Suho might have failed to foresee the breakout, or perhaps had deliberately courted the danger for reasons unknown. Either way, Dojin resolved to keep his distance for now and observe. He decided patience would let him measure Suho's true strength and intent before committing to action. In the still calm of a countryside morning, a young Suho sat beside his grandfather at the edge of a quiet pond. Suho's gaze lingered on the old man's weathered hands, tracing the scars that marked them. Curiosity broke through his small voice as he asked why his grandfather bore so many wounds. The old man chuckled softly, regarding them not as blemishes but as memories. He called them badges, mementos of a life spent stepping forward when others turned away. One scar had come from saving a child trapped in a burning building, another from stopping a drunkard before he could harm someone else. Each mark carried the story of a moment when he acted before thinking. When Suho asked why he would risk pain for strangers, the old man smiled faintly and answered that it wasn't courage that drove him. Fear existed, but instinct always spoke louder. His body had simply moved first. That lesson, buried deep in Suho's childhood, would echo years later. Now grown, he raced across a ravaged landscape, his pace so fast it split the air. Lightning-like trails marked his passage as he tore through the distance toward Jisun prison. Every stride pulsed with desperation and resolve. He had thought the beast possession skill would take him there instantly, but even power had its limits. His heart pounded with urgency as his thoughts reached out to Gray, his loyal companion, a silent plea for his bond to hold on just a little longer. The horizon erupted in flame and smoke as he neared. With a surge of strength, Suho vaulted high above the rooftops, scanning the expanse below. The sight that met him froze the breath in his chest. The city around the prison had become a pit of suffering. Screams pierced the air like blades. Each cry carried the weight of terror and despair. His heightened senses, sharpened by the bond skill, turned the world into a chorus of agony that clawed at his mind. He could hear everything, every life ending, every plea unanswered. Without pause, Suho descended, Gray materializing beside him as they landed in perfect synchronicity. The impact sent dust curling around their feet as they slid to a halt. Before them lay the grim aftermath. Streets painted with blood, lifeless bodies sprawled across cracked pavement, and prisoners standing over the corpses, confused by the sudden arrival of an overwhelming presence. One of the prisoners sneered as Suho and his companion landed before them, mocking what he saw as an absurd sight. A man and his beast dropping from the sky into a war zone. His laughter, however, was short-lived. Suho praised Gray softly for the effort before taking a step forward. From that moment on, he would handle everything. The prisoners exchanged crude remarks, amused and emboldened by numbers. They jeered at his apparent exhaustion, convinced he was too drained to fight. But before another word left their mouths, Suho vanished from sight. A blur cut through the air, then came the sound of impact. One of the fugitives was sent crashing into the pavement with such force that the ground cracked beneath him. Suho addressed them with chilling composure. Those who had escaped from Jisan should have kept running. Instead, they had chosen to harm the innocent. His tone sharpened as he laid down their ultimatum. Surrender and be knocked out quietly, or resist and die where they stood. The mob faltered. One of them, his voice trembling, whispered the question that gripped them all. Had they just witnessed a kick strong enough to belong to a high-rank hunter? Panic gave way to reckless bravado. Another inmate spat blood from his mouth and laughed, pulling out a small vial filled with glittering particles. He crushed it between his teeth and swallowed. The others followed his lead, eager and desperate. Within moments, their bodies convulsed, veins glowing like molten light beneath their skin. A thick, violent aura erupted around them, the mark of the star fragment's corruption. Their laughter grew manic as the intoxicating power took hold. The energy coursed through their bodies, dulling pain and warping reason. They shouted in ecstasy, convinced they had transcended their limits. To them, even A-rank or S-rank hunters were no longer threats. Suho's eyes narrowed. The faint rumble of energy built around him again as he muttered his verdict, so they had chosen defiance. Quiet surrender was no longer an option. A cold, mocking voice slipped through the air from behind him, slicing through the noise of the battlefield like a blade. Why are you even asking? Suho turned sharply, and there it was, a shadow coalescing from the darkness, shaped like the man whose death had haunted him. The spectral form of Lee Min-sung emerged. His voice carried that same venomous arrogance even in death, laced with derision and scorn. Min-sung's eyes gleamed with malicious amusement as he observed the prisoners swelling with the power of star fragments. He taunted Suho mercilessly, accusing him of hesitation while the city burned, while innocents screamed and died at the hands of escaped criminals. To Min-sung, Suho's restraint was weakness. He ridiculed the very essence of Suho's humanity, the hesitation to kill, and sneered that his class change had meant nothing if he still clung to moral restraint. The ghost's laughter rang hollow as he gestured to the gaping wound in his own chest. His voice rose to a frenzied pitch, daring Suho to repeat his past sin, to kill again without hesitation. He demanded that Suho pierce their bodies just as he had done to him, screaming for proof that the young hunter had finally accepted what he was capable of. The words dug deep. Rage, disgust, and guilt twisted inside Suho's chest, his composure fracturing beneath the weight of it. His jaw tightened, his hands trembling not from fear, but from fury. Then, without another thought, he brought his foot down on the nearest fallen prisoner's skull, crushing it in a brutal motion. Blood splattered outward as bone cracked, and silence rippled through the rest of the inmates. Terror flickered in their eyes, confusion too. None of them could comprehend how easily their strength, bolstered by the star fragment, was rendered meaningless before him. Then panic turned to defiance. With desperate screams, they raised their weapons and charged. Suho met them with lethal precision. The first attacker lunged, only to have his assault intercepted by a blur of motion. Suho's strike pierced through flesh and vein, his movement so fast that the man's body was riddled with wounds before he even fell. The prisoner collapsed, lifeless, before the others realized what had happened. One of the survivors stammered in disbelief, unable to process it. He had swallowed a star fragment, felt his power surge, and yet he couldn't even see Suho's attack. That confusion was his last thought before Suho's fist shattered his jaw with a single blow, sending shards of bone scattering into the dirt. Two more came from behind, howling, weapons raised. Suho didn't turn. Instead, shadows burst from beneath his feet, swirling like living smoke. They shaped themselves into jagged spears, each one lancing through the air with unerring precision. The spikes struck the charging men before they could blink, impaling them clean through. The force of impact left nothing but silence and the slow crumbling of their bodies to the ground. Min-sung's ghost stepped closer, his expression caught between mockery and fascination. He studied Suho with a knowing smirk, as if savoring the transformation. He remarked on how much Suho had changed, how swiftly he had grown stronger, and how natural the violence had begun to look on him. Then his tone darkened, twisting with cold amusement as he delivered the final blow of his torment. He told Suho that he could have subdued them, that killing them all was unnecessary. He accused him of losing his humanity, of crossing the same line that divided monsters from men, and with quiet venom, the ghost whispered that perhaps Suho was no longer a hunter at all, but a monster himself. Suho silently called Beru and issued the command without hesitation. Beru obeyed as he moved through the prisoners like a predator through mist, consuming flesh and memory with clinical efficiency. Beru paused, paused and, with a cautious tilt of his head, questioned Suho's composure. Suho steadied himself and admitted the truth to Beru at his side. He had come to save people, but saving them had sparked something larger. Irritation at a world that fractured when it needed unity most. The looming threat of the Atarim demanded a different scale of response, and Suho's patience with small, localized conflicts had worn thin. He resolved quietly and with iron clarity to stop hiding. He would gather every form of power that could possibly stand against the Apostle of the Atarim, a descendants of monarchs, hunters, villains, artifacts, even magic beasts, and weld them into a force capable of resisting the coming storm. Beru registered the scope of that intent with blunt, disbelieving concern, asking if Suho truly meant to bend the world to his will. Suho answered not with rhetoric, but with resolve. He would consolidate strength, eliminate the fugitives in the city, and cease to hesitate. As Suho finalized his plan, the city answered with a new, sudden violence. A car that had been coasting through the wrecked streets screeched to a halt. An unseen burst ripped outward, and the vehicle erupted in flame. Heat licked the air, and smoke unfurled like a dark flag across the sky. Dongsoo sneered at the chaos, contempt curling in his voice as he mocked the desperate scavengers picking through wreckage. He assumed they had not noticed the city burning around them, blind to the larger storm his rebellion had unleashed. Sudden motion cleaved the smoke. A car erupted in a blast that sheared its door free and hurled it like a missile. The mangled panel slammed into the wall beneath the ledge where Dongsoo and his followers had been standing, sending concrete dust into the air and freezing the rioters with shock. A pair stepped from the smoke with the calm of practiced hunters. The duo, a lean woman, Miho of the White Tiger Guild, and her father, Baek Yunho, the guildmaster, moved with effortless precision through the inferno. Their presence cut through the riot like cold steel. Where fugitives lurked, they fell. In minutes, the father and daughter reduced pockets of resistance, their movements efficient and merciless when required, as they prioritized saving the living over lingering on the dead. Miho estimated the scale at a grim 5,000 of escaped prisoners, and Baek's concerns flickered between duty and domesticity. He could already imagine the scolding waiting should they be late returning to a family obligation. Still, reports accelerated around them. The Hunters Association chairman himself was mobilizing, and 3 S-rank hunters were en route, expected within 10 minutes. Another message stung sharper. Sung Suho, the man wanted for alleged star powder distribution, might be operating inside the breach. Baek's memory tugged at the unfamiliar name, a vague echo he could not place, but his decision was immediate and unsentimental. The safety of the civilians came first. Private curiosities and rumors would have to wait. Miho's remark pulled a memory from Baek like a thread. The image of him hauling survivors from burning buildings during his days as a firefighter. Baek scanned the streets for the source of the carnage and asked if any dungeon breaches had been reported. Miho found none, but the answer only deepened their unease. Their gaze locked on something that did not belong. A black-clad shadow soldier standing motionless among the ruins, its form draped in night as if the darkness itself had taken shape to watch them. Around them, the city bled. A small girl crouched, trembling, eyes wide and fixed on a scene no child should ever see. A hunter lunged between her and a mob of fugitives, pleading with desperate gestures for the girl to run. The prisoners answered with brutality. They stabbed him without hesitation and he fell, blood flowering quickly around his body. A thug taunted the fallen man's devotion, crudely speculating about romance and calling the hunter's sacrifice pathetic. The girl, voice raw with grief and confusion, reached out and called the hunter by name, as if hope might pull him back. The prisoner barked for her to stop sobbing and closed in, sword raised to finish the cruelty. Before the blade could fall, the air shifted as if answering a silent summons. Shadows churned at the dead hunter's side, coalescing into a protector shaped from his final resolve. The dark figure stepped between sword and girl, its movement precise and ruthless. The prisoner recoiled in disbelief at the sight of the dead man's silhouette standing again, and for a moment his bravado cracked. Suho stood apart, watching the summons take form. He had offered the fallen hunter one last duty, to protect what had mattered to him in life. The shadow obeyed without question. It struck with the weight of judgment, smashing the attacker with a force that ended him instantly. Shock rippled through the remaining prisoners. Panic swallowed their earlier intoxicated courage. Within seconds, the resistance collapsed. Suho moved through the bodies with grim efficiency, drawing the lingering essence from each corpse. The shadows he harvested folded into his arsenal like returning weapons. Beru's pride rang clear in the way the creature admired the growth of their force. He reveled in the tangible proof of Suho's power, calling attention to the authority that shadow granted. Suho allowed himself a rare, small admission of wonder. What he had once dismissed as useless now revealed itself as astonishingly effective. For a moment, he let that satisfaction settle into him, surprised at how differently he carried himself compared to the first clashes of the night. Beneath the satisfaction, though, a solemnness lingered. Suho decided one of the summoned shadows deserved a proper farewell, a quiet fade rather than than abrupt erasure, and told Beru so. He wanted that soldier to vanish with dignity when the time came. Beru noted the change in him with blunt enthusiasm, remarking on how the young monarch had become steadier, colder, and somehow more complete. The calm fractured like glass when Suho's instincts flared. A sudden collapse of the field of vision told him at once what had happened. Many of his shadow soldiers had been felled in a concentrated strike. Beru's voice slipped into concern and command to find the ringleader. Suho's resolve hardened. He would not let the source of this chaos remain hidden. On the ground, Taishik unleashed a brutal, efficient assault against the remaining shadows. He moved like a surgical blade, each attack calibrated to sever spirit from form and tear the dark soldiers apart. Dongsuk watched the carnage with a mixture of awe and bewilderment. He could not name the creatures he saw. The black soldiers were unlike any magic beast he had encountered. Dongsuk barked orders, pushing Taishik to move and clear the area while he reveled in the chaos. Taishik obliged with impatient bravado, boasting in his head about the star fragment's temporary power and how it made him feel stronger than an A rank. He reassured himself that these D and C rank foes were beneath him. Then the scene stilled. The shadow soldiers, once a writhing tide, dropped to their knees in unison as if acknowledging a higher will. Taishik flinched at the sudden change and scanned for the cause. Suho and Beru approached without fanfare. Beru's presence betrayed a hint of triumph. The harvest had paid off, and the Dark Army's response confirmed it, while Suho's eyes locked onto the man at the center of the riot. Recognition hardened his features. The ringleader was Hwang Dong-suk. Dong-suk bristled with insolent confidence, sure he could command the moment. His arrogance filled the air like smoke. Suho closed the distance. He demanded, with the gravity of a man who had seen too much, to know whether Dong-suk understood the apostle of the Atarim. Dong-suk parried with bluster, claiming familiarity and treating the apostle like some distant rumor or cult. Taishik watched the exchange with professional appraisal. He noted how summoner-type hunters tended to have low physical grades and became vulnerable when stripped of their summons, a weakness he kept mentally filed away even as Dongsuk's laughter echoed. Taishik moved past Dongsuk towards Suho, but the motion came too late. Suho closed like a shadow swallowing light and placed a steady hand on Dongsuk's shoulder. Fear cracked Dongsuk's bravado. The man went rigid under that touch. Suho demanded to know how the fugitives had acquired the star fragments and why they had turned a prison break into a massacre. Dongsuk's mind fluttered between panic and bluff. He realized with a jolt of dawning terror that the boy before him was no ordinary summoner. Cornered, Dongsuk tried to buy time with the only card he had, threats of his S-rank brother, but Suho answered without words. He drove his nails into Dongsuk's shoulder and tore him down with brutal force. Concrete fractured under the pressure as the earth split around them. Dongsuk's scream cleaved the air while blood welled where bone met skin. Suho's grip did not soften until the truth was dragged from the man's lips. The fragments had come from his brother, and the killings had been nothing more than Dongsuk's perverse amusement. Kang Taishik watched the scene with rising alarm. From his surface swagger to his private calculations, he felt the situation tipping beyond control. Abandon Dongsuk and escape, he reasoned. Any other choice risked making a powerful enemy of an S-rank. Fear braided with instinct as he began to back away. A voice, distant and composed, slid into Taishik's head like an order. Dojin, stationed far from the melee, had chosen observation over confrontation. He wanted to measure Sung Suho's skills firsthand. The suggestion in Taishik's mind, subtle, irresistible, folded his earlier reluctance beneath a colder will. Taishik's movements ceased to belong entirely to him. Under that foreign compulsion, he activated camouflage, but the skill became a blur of obedience rather than strategy. His blade moved as if guided by another's hand. Streaks of light carved clean arcs through Dongsuk's body. The ringleader had no time to plead or scream. He crumpled, cut down by an unseen choreography of steel. Suho withdrew his hand and let Dongsuk's body slump into the dust. Beru, ever attuned to power, stiffened beside Suho. Beru had sensed a presence, the unmistakable trace of the apostle of the Atarim. Taishik's grin split the air as he lunged, dual blades singing. He attacked the shadow soldiers first, cutting through the newly risen forms with a practiced cruelty, then turned that same ferocity towards Suho. His strikes landed with savage precision. Bloody crescents trailed down Suho's face as the assassin's camouflage and speed made the hits almost invisible. Pain flared hot and bright, but Suho's senses, sharpened by the bond skill, registered only faint echoes of Taishik's footsteps. He could dodge. He could not find an opening to retaliate. Dojin and a handful of other hunters swooped in across the smoke-streaked skyline, but from Dojin's vantage, the situation looked clear and dangerous. Kang Taishik had reached the upper echelons of A-rank capability, and Suho, raked by blades, was not yet at the level to beat such an opponent. Dojin decided to watch rather than leap in. This was a chance to measure Sung Suho's true strength. Then a voice cut through the din, audible in a way that made the hairs on Dojin's neck rise. The speaker, Suho, declaring himself unearthed the strange logic that had bound him to secrecy and tore it away. He admitted that he had hidden his existence for a reason, that obscurity had once been strategy, but that the pattern of exposure, mysterious appearances, the use of star powder to puppeteer the weak signaled preparation rather than cowardice. If the apostle was a being that grew, Suho declared, then he would grow too. He would stop hiding and force the invader to reveal itself. As the declaration faded, Suho's shadows answered like obedient instruments. Darkness churned at his feet and reformed into long serrated spears. The earth itself seemed to obey. Jagged shafts erupted from the ground beneath Kang Taishik and launched in perfect, merciless synchrony. The spikes pierced from every angle, riving flesh and steel, and Suho closed with the inevitable finishing strike that cleaved through the assassin's core. Kang crumpled without a final word. A system notification chimed cleanly through the haze, an impartial mechanical tally of change, and the message registered that Suho had leveled up. Suho's voice sliced through the smoke, cold, steady, and raw with challenge, calling whatever shadowed presence had been pulling strings to reveal itself. Inside a nearby chopper, Park Dojin flinched at the tone. Lim Taegyu glanced toward him, tension written across his face, and Dojin held his silence like a shield. A single name, Sung Suho, hung behind Dojin's eyes, the mask of duty momentarily showing its seam. Beneath Suho's command, darkness rose. Shadows peeled from the corpses of the defeated and reformed into obedient shapes. Dongsuk and Kang Taishik, newly felled, folded into that black roster and became part of Suho's growing legion. He pushed further, invoking shadow creation. He sent the harvested essences into the shadow dungeon, expecting the familiar pattern of disassembly and reassembly. Instead, the collected darkness answered with surprising initiative. The shadows knitted themselves together and began to extrude matter. Metal and thread and dark weave coalesced without his deliberate design, and objects took shape. Armor that gleamed with rare strength, bolstering defense and attack, and a ring that thrummed with an active skill. Camouflage. Suho watched, astonished, as the single form absorbed and refined the scattered echoes into something finer than he had produced by force. The realization struck him like a cold truth. This was the shadow item contract's latent promise made manifest. Imbuing a name would not simply label an object, it would awaken purpose. As the darkness cooled into finished metal, one ring settled into his palm. The ring bore a name that fit its nature, Killer Ring. Suho spoke the word of command, and the ring flared with a cold inner light and accepted its new designation, Kira. System messages cascaded across his vision like falling embers. A manual had been generated explaining the mechanics of shadow item naming. The instructions were clinical and absolute. The named item would bind to its first wearer. Other hands could not don it, and as the shadow creator's level rose, the item's shadow soldier stats would bleed into its wearer. He slid Kira onto his finger and felt the change instantly. A level marker blinked into being on the ring, and a warm thread of power braided through his senses. The attributes the ring possessed in its shadow soldier form would now augment him directly. A quick, ruthless calculation crossed his mind. If he could craft items of ever higher grade, the acceleration of his strength would be exponential. Each heroic or greater piece would push him closer to the one thing that mattered most. Standing beside his father sooner, no longer a burden but a bulwark, but there was no time for dreams. Suddenly, a white-hot claw ripped through the ranks of his shadow soldiers, a single swipe vaporizing men and mist alike. The slaughter came like a wound across the battlefield, and Suho felt the echo of lost shadows vanish from his command. Alarm flared in Beru beside him, asked without words what had felled their force. Suho's instincts answered the same way. Something powerful was approaching. The city answered with an impact so violent that masonry exploded outward, and Beru reeled beneath the concussion. A figure hurtled through the breach in the wall and landed amid the smoke. A huge man with the white fur of a great cat along his back, and claws like sheared blades. He announced that he had come because of the black pillar Suho's presence had made, and because the sight of flames had driven him to the front lines. For the briefest instant, Suho's mind cataloged possibilities. A talking magic beast, a summoned guardian, something anomalous among S-ranks. This was Baek Yunho, guildmaster of the White Tiger Guild, an S-rank with a rare transformation ability. Baek's nostrils flared at the metallic tang of fresh blood that clung to Suho's clothes, suspicion sharpening his posture. Suho answered with plain purpose. He was a hunter, here to rescue the civilians. He introduced himself as Sung Suho and insisted that the accusations from the Hunters Association were false. The words sat between them like a small, fragile truce. Baek's reaction moved from amused disbelief to something darker and more searching. Laughter surfaced first as incredulous and sharp at the idea that the wanted man would stand openly in the wreckage. Then the guildmaster's expression hardened as he recalled the White Tiger Guild's own casualty. A member felled after exposure to star powder. Baek's doubt became a measured challenge. If Suho truly claimed innocence, how would he prove it while the city burned? Suho, uncluttered by rhetoric, pushed pragmatism ahead of defense. He admitted there was no time for proof now. People still needed saving, and he was stretched thin. Relief creased his features at Baek's arrival. An S-rank presence meant fewer lives lost, and he urged them to move, to put rescue before accusation. The hunter's single sentence struck a chord inside Baek. It reminded him of the old doctrine he had lived by when he pulled survivors from collapsing buildings as a firefighter. Hesitation kills. His partner's voice resurfaced in memory, insisting that in moments of crisis, one must act first and correct later, because action preserved lives. That lesson dissolved Baek's suspicion into reluctant assent. A fragment of recognition pricked Baek's mind. The name Sung Suho tugged at a half-remembered corner of his memory. Baek's face broke into a delighted grin as recognition clicked into place. Sung Suho was the very grandson the old captain had bragged about for years. The revelation braided memory and duty into something warmer than the ruin around them, and without fanfare the two of them plunged back into the hunt. Where the city narrowed to a bridge, two guards huddled under the weak safety of their helmets, trading uncertain glances. The junior man worried aloud about confronting awakened fugitives alone. Rumors that bullets barely grazed these powered men had frayed their courage. Their leader answered with brittle resolve. Orders were orders, but even his voice betrayed the same unease that had settled over the whole district. Across the street, Baek and Suho moved like a single blade. The White Tiger Guildmasters clawed strikes, and Suho's shadow-born precision collapsed the fugitives' pockets of resistance in record time. Where brute force met cunning, the shadows and the beast outmatched both. Prisoners who had thought themselves gods after the star fragments found that their new power evaporated before steady technique and unflinching purpose. Baek watched Suho closely, admiration softening his stern features. He praised the younger hunter's speed and command, then, less formally, wore a familial warmth that invited closeness. He brushed aside ceremony and offered the easy authority of someone who had known the Sung family for years. Suho, for his part, registered a private jolt of recognition. The White Tiger Guildmaster had once been his grandfather's junior in the firehouse, a link between past service and present duty. Their exchange was brief but meaningful. Suho acknowledged Baek's prowess and the gulf between an S-rank's instinct and a novice's learning curve. Baek, amused and practical, urged a simple orientation. This was a rescue, not a manhunt. Show a strong presence, he implied, and the fugitives would find fewer opportunities to strike. Suho felt the shape of his priorities shift beneath him like tectonic plates. A cold, honest thought rose. For too long, he had narrowed his mind to one purpose: hunting down fugitives, and that single-mindedness had crowded out everything else. Baek's gruff warmth broke the tension. He teased Suho about personal matters with the easy familiarity of a man who'd known the Sung family for years, nudging at the younger hunter's private life and imagining future family ties. The suggestion amused Baek. It startled Suho, who flushed with surprise at the sudden domestic banter amid ruin. Rotors thundered overhead as a chopper cut through the smoky sky and hovered above the chaos. From the aircraft, Jimchul radioed down, a voice anchored by command and relief as he confirmed the evacuation. The dispatched hunters and civilians had been conveyed to relative safety thanks to Baek Miho's swift actions. Miho's reply carried only modesty. She insisted she had merely done her duty, even as those on the ground felt the steadiness of her competence. Jimchul's gaze narrowed at the sight of unnatural silhouettes among the fugitives. Dark figures moved with an otherworldly cadence, and he flagged the anomaly aloud, asking whether these were magic beasts. Miho, breathing smoke and ash, admitted she could not tell. Lim Taegyu answered the uncertainty. He would eliminate the black shapes along with the fugitives. Jimchul's alarm surged as he tried to restrain the impulsive hunter. He warned Taegyu against rushing in. The warning proved futile. Taegyu abandoned caution and leapt from the hovering chopper, a controlled lightning bolt dropping into the fray. From his vantage above the battlefield, Taegyu marked the shadow soldiers with the calm precision of a trained marksman. He notched more than a dozen arrows at once, then released them in a single devastating volley. The projectiles arced and sang, striking the shadow soldiers with surgical accuracy and ripping through the dark construct's cohesion. Where the arrows struck, the shadows shuddered and dissolved. Lim Taegyu hunted Suho with accusations lodged in every step, convinced the wanted man had distributed star powder and caused the havoc. He dropped from above like a living projectile, drawing a single arrow and loosing it with terrifying precision. The shaft descended at a blinding speed that left a line of wind in its wake. Suho crossed his arms in reflex to block the strike, but Baek Yunho moved faster. The guildmaster caught the arrow between his fingers and held it steady, refusing to let it reach the younger hunter. Taegyu eyed Baek with disbelief and contempt, wondering aloud why an S-rank would stand beside a wanted man. Baek answered not with words, but with measured resolve. Suho's actions had been rescuing people, and that reality deserved consideration before judgment. Taegyu's fury swelled into a demand for clarity about Baek's relationship with Suho. In response, Baek shed restraint and shifted into his beast form, white fur bristling along his back and claws extending like leved steel. The transformation carried a single, unmistakable message. He would not let blind vengeance sever reason. Power gathered around them as the two forces faced one another, the air humming with the promise of violence. Suho felt the tension twist inside him. The last thing he wanted was a battle between powerful hunters while the city still burned. He weighed his options in a heartbeat, the responsibility to protect wrestling with the danger of conflict. At that moment, Jongin and other leaders stepped forward into the widening circle. Jongin slammed the meeting with authority, ordering everyone to clear their heads. This was no time for hunter-on-hunter feuds when the city still burned. Baek Yoonho stepped forward with easy pride, announcing the connection that dissolved suspicion. Sung Suho was the grandson the old captain had bragged about, the same Sung Il-hwan Baek had known in his firefighting days. Baek vouched for the young hunter without hesitation, his tone part memory and part blunt loyalty, while Miho met the claim with cool pragmatism. Family ties might explain familiarity, she thought, but they did not replace proof. Jongin sided with Lim Taegyu's hardline logic. A fugitive who refused a summons still deserved arrest, and the room tilted toward containment. Dojin remained unreadable and said nothing, his silence a weight of its own. Taegyu's anger hardened into a threat. If Baek defended a criminal out of sentiment, he would not hesitate to remove Baek first. Baek answered with the steady insistence of a man who had chosen action over accusation. At that moment, Jimchul stepped forward and the argument stilled. All eyes found him. He demanded that Sung Suho produce proof of innocence, insisting that words alone could not settle the matter. Beneath his outward command, a private question gnawed. Why had memories of another life resurfaced now? He let the thought settle. Perhaps Sung Jinwoo had known this day would come, that he would one day walk away so someone else could carry the burden of a world broken by the cataclysm. For the coming war, for the chaos that would bloom, and for the lone fighter he pictured standing before the storm, Jimchul felt a strange, stubborn sympathy for Suho. Suho's voice faltered into a stammer, the weight of accusation and expectation pressing on him like a physical force. Before he could gather himself, Jongin moved to cut the moment short, insisting that such introspection had no place amid crisis. A fugitive who fled, even while saving lives, must answer for his choices. Jimchul's private reaction hardened into a single, blunt thought. Jongin was the greatest obstacle. Predictable, principled, immovable. Jongin pressed the case with a series of stinging charges, reminding everyone of Suho's alleged forged registration, his presence at multiple raids tied to Star Powder incidents, and the unignorable accusation that he had murdered Lee Min-sung. Lim Taegyu's outrage snapped like a wire. He demanded immediate detention, convinced the evidence, circumstantial though it might be, already warranted arrest. The room's mood tilted toward punitive action, momentum gathering behind apprehension rather than inquiry. But Jimchul's thoughts ran a different track. Logic insisted that arrest made sense, that the association's trust had been breached. Yet another voice, older, quieter, and more dangerous, argued for a different morality. Even if he lost every scrap of public trust, Jimchul felt compelled to stand with Suho. He remembered the speed with which Suho had arrived, and the civilians he had pulled from the flames. In Jimchul's judgment, that reality mattered. Arrest in the middle of a rescue would be an injustice. He spoke for restraint, insisting that Suho's actions at the scene weighed against immediate harsh punishment. Jongin watched Jimchul with a new, sharp suspicion. He had known the chairman a long time, but he had never seen him so willing to tip scales in favor of a suspect. Jongin wondered whether Jimchul could not see the anger in Taegyu's stance, or whether he had some other reason to defend Suho, even if it meant antagonizing powerful allies like the Reaper Guild. Shadows coalesced around Suho like living ink, and every hunter tensed as the air tightened. He moved with the single-minded certainty of a man with nothing left to lose. He would prove his innocence, by means that might bruise more than a few consciences. Jimchul's posture snapped towards Suho, an urgent caution radiating from him, but Taegyu's outrage had already consumed reason. With a predator's steadiness, he drew an arrow and loosed it straight at Suho. The shaft tore through the smoke and struck the young hunter's shoulder. Pain flared, teeth clenched, but Suho did not falter. Baek lunged, instinct and concern contorting his face as he attempted to intervene, but the shadows answered before he could reach them. One of the dark shapes twisted into the impossible form of a key and drove itself into Taegyu's belly like a living truth. The insertion unlocked something inside the seasoned hunter. Memories ripped back into being, a life that had been other names and other nights. Images crashed through Taegyu, years as a guildmaster, sparring matches with brothers in arms, the heavy ordinary burdens of command. His eyes dilated with disbelief, the world rearranged around the newly returned past. Beru murmured his surprise aloud, sensing the intent behind Suho's move. The shadow beast's instincts read the strategy plainly. Suho was not merely fighting, he was restoring. If veteran hunters who had lived through Suho's father's era could reclaim the memories of a past world, they might hear the boy out. They might heed a voice born of shared history. Suho's resolve sharpened. He scanned the crowd and fixed on two figures he needed to reach next, Baek Yoonho and Choi Jongin. They had to remember. They had to understand. He launched himself into the air, every muscle coiled to force a reckoning. Jongin reacted with the reflex of command. Flames roared from his palms, a torrent of heat and light hurled toward toward the charging silhouette. The blast engulfed Suho in a wall of scorching fire intended to stop the advance cold. Baek's face went white with alarm as he shouted Suho's name, torn between defense and the fear of what the boy's gambit might cost them all. Jong-in's voice, sharp, incredulous, carried in the aftermath. Suho had charged without warning, acting with the kind of dangerous unpredictability Taegyu had warned about. Suho stood firm amidst the roaring flames. Step by step, he advanced through the blaze. His eyes locked onto Jong-in, and with unrelenting will, he pushed forward. But before he could reach him, Miho's foot struck with fierce precision, a powerful kick landing on Suho's shoulder, halting his approach. Yet Suho's intent had already been fulfilled. The ethereal ki had found its mark, embedding itself into Jong-in's chest. In that instant, Jong-in's eyes widened as forgotten fragments of his past life came flooding back. Each memory ignited within him like a surge of electricity, sending shivers racing down his spine. Miho, witnessing the chaos unfold, called out in alarm, her voice trembling with fear and urgency. Suho's breathing was steady, his expression resolute. He knew his role was complete. The fight within him quieted as he accepted that his task had reached its end. All that remained now was to wait for what would come next. But Miho's emotions exploded into rage. Fueled by fury and confusion, she lunged at Suho. Just before her strike could land, a wavering voice cut through the air. Taegyu's words stopped her cold. Miho froze. Her voice trembled as she called out to him. Taegyu's eyes glistened as tears began to form, his body trembling under the weight of realization. It wasn't a spell, nor a trick. It felt as though he had awakened a part of himself long buried in oblivion. Memories cascaded through Jong-in's mind as well, forcing him to confront a truth he had never known he'd forgotten. The irony of it twisted his expression into one of bitter disbelief. His voice carried the sharp edge of accusation as he faced Suho, demanding to know the truth of what had been done to them. Suho slowly lifted himself up, his gaze unwavering. A faint hint of relief passed through his eyes, as though he had waited for this moment of understanding. He told them calmly that what they were seeing, those memories, were remnants of a world that existed before everything had been reset. Jong-in's eyes narrowed in confusion at the word. A reset. Suho's tone carried the weight of certainty. He explained that this world had once been wiped clean, reshaped into what they now knew. That was why it had been able to sustain peace for so long, until the cataclysm struck, shattering the fragile illusion that had held it together. Jong-in's expression hardened as realization began to dawn. If the world had been reset, could it be connected to Hunter Sung Jinwoo himself? Suho regarded Jong-in quietly, his gaze steady and knowing. He seemed unsurprised by the connection Jong-in had made. Suho then spoke with a solemn tone, explaining that although Sung Jinwoo was his father, he knew little of him as a hunter. What he did know, however, was enough to fill him with both pride and sorrow. His father had always carried the burden of countless worlds upon his own shoulders, alone. Even now, Jinwoo was standing at the edge of reality itself, holding back an invasion from beyond the outer space. Every battle he fought, every drop of blood he shed was for one purpose: to aid his father in that eternal struggle against the invaders. Taegyu listened in silence, disbelief flickering in his eyes. Suho's words sounded impossible, even absurd, yet something within him resonated with truth. Inside Jong-in's mind, thoughts churned. The flashes of memory he had witnessed, vivid and unmistakable, lined up perfectly with Suho's claims. If everything that had returned to him was real, then the young hunter's words were not far-fetched at all. It was then that Jimchul stepped forward, his tone filled with firm conviction. He declared that every word spoken by Sung Suho was true. Like them, he too carried the memories of a past life as a hunter. It was those very memories that had guided him when catastrophe struck. The knowledge of his previous existence allowed him to rebuild the Hunters Association swiftly after the cataclysm. His gaze swept over the others as he urged them to listen, to truly hear what Suho had to say before making judgments. And so, the conversation deepened. For hours, Suho and the hunters who had regained their memories exchanged everything they knew. Suho revealed the grim truth: the invasion of the outer gods known as the Itarim, their apostle who now walked among humankind, and the strange substance he had sown across the earth, the star powder that lured humanity toward ruin. The weight of it all settled upon the group like a shadow. Jong-in's voice, filled with unease, broke the silence as he pieced the pattern together in his thoughts. Almost every tragedy, every unexplained event that had plagued them until now could be traced back to the Itarim. Taegyu's expression darkened as understanding struck him. It was all connected: the chaos, the deaths, even the downfall of those they once trusted. The name Itarim echoed in his mind with dread. Suho confirmed it grimly. Every one of those incidents had been orchestrated by the apostle of the Itarim. Taegyu realized that even Lee Min-sung's death was likely part of the same web. Jimchul's frustration broke through the tension as he demanded to know why Suho had hidden this truth for so long. Why had he not come forward sooner? Suho's expression was calm but laced with melancholy. He explained that if his existence became known to the apostle of the Itarim, it would endanger not only himself but also his father. He could not allow Sung Jinwoo to be burdened by his presence. Until he grew strong enough to stand beside him, him. Not as a liability, but as a shield. He had chosen to remain in the shadows. Jong-in's realization came swiftly, his thoughts aligning with certainty. If Suho possessed such strength, then he too must be a hunter capable of leveling. Just like Sung Jinwoo, Suho acknowledged it with quiet confidence. Excitement flickered across Jong-in's expression as he recalled a name from his memories. Cha Hae-in, once a part of the Hunters Guild. The name struck Suho like a bolt of disbelief. His mother, the gentle woman he knew, had been a hunter as well. At the back, Dojin remained silent, his gaze fixed on Suho. The young hunter's boldness was dangerous, yet his decisiveness was undeniable. Suho's fearlessness would shape the future, and Dojin knew he could not allow him to act unchecked. The next fragment had to arrive soon. Baek broke the silence, his tone uneasy. The misunderstanding around Suho was cleared, yet confusion still clouded the air. Suho met his uncertainty calmly and offered to help them see for themselves. He proposed unlocking the memories of their past world. Baek hesitated only for a moment. Miho protested, warning her father that such power was too dangerous to trust. But Baek placed his faith in Suho and extended his hand. As Suho inserted the key, shadows gathered around them. Power pulsed through the air as the connection formed. Miho's cry of frustration went unheard as Baek trembled under the surge of returning memories. Tears formed in his eyes as warmth flooded his chest. The faces, the emotions, the forgotten fragments, all returned with striking clarity. A soft whisper escaped him, to feel the warmth of a past he had long forgotten. Dojin stood in silence, his expression unreadable as thoughts raced through his mind. The revelation of the world's reset unsettled him. If this world had indeed been remade, then the key Suho wielded would never respond to him, for he was not a being born of this world. The realization was troubling. If such a fact came to light, it would draw suspicion toward him immediately. His gaze darkened as he weighed his options. Perhaps he could ignite chaos using the followers he had gathered, the so-called believers. Yet even with thousands at his command, his current power would achieve little more than another small-scale disturbance, like the prison escape incident. The time for war had not yet come. What he needed now was patience, and the right decision. Across from him, Miho frowned in confusion. She felt nothing. No memories, no visions, no warmth of recollection. Suho's brow furrowed. That shouldn't have been possible. Everyone else had regained fragments of their past, yet Miho's mind remained untouched. He stepped closer, concentrating, intent on understanding why. From the shadows, a familiar voice emerged. Beru appeared beside Suho. He suggested that there might be others like Miho, individuals incapable of recovering memories because they were never part of the past world to begin with. Miho blinked at him, unimpressed. To her, he appeared frail and strange, hardly intimidating. Beru's pride flared instantly. The insult stung him deeply, and his killing intent rose, threatening to erupt. Suho raised a hand and ordered Beru to continue his explanation. Beru steadied himself and spoke again, his tone returning to composed precision. He explained that the past world, the one they sought to recall, had existed 20 years ago in this very timeline, when mana still flowed through the earth. But after peace returned, mana vanished entirely. Given that change, it was only natural that differences would appear among people. Some, he reasoned, simply hadn't existed in that old world at all. Miho's expression softened into confusion as she processed his words. Could it be that she truly had no past to remember? The thought unsettled her deeply. Suho tested the theory further. He turned toward Dojin and inserted the key once more, attempting to awaken whatever remnants might lie within. But the result was the same. Nothing. Dojin looked up calmly, showing no trace of surprise. He admitted without hesitation that no memories surfaced for him either. Suho's thoughts darkened as understanding began to form. Even Hunter Park Dojin, one of the most powerful among them, hadn't existed in the world before the reset. Miho turned toward her father, her voice quiet yet uncertain as she questioned whether she truly hadn't existed in the past world. Baek didn't answer directly, instead remarking how extraordinary it was. Suho shifted his gaze toward Chairman Woo Jim-chul, calling his attention. Jim-chul nodded gravely. He understood what Suho meant. With calm conviction, he explained that this peace, the calm world they now lived in, was the result of Sung Jinwoo's final decision. Countless lives, countless souls that had never been part of the old world were now living freely because of that choice. Suho's eyes lifted to the sky, his heart heavy. He could almost feel his father's presence beyond the stars, still fighting, still holding the line alone. His thoughts carried a silent plea. If the outer gods descended upon them now, humanity would have no hope of surviving. His voice grew firm, filled with resolve as he asked those around him to lend him their strength, for the world, and for the peace his father had protected. Later that day, the story broke across every television and news feed in the nation. Chairman Jim-chul and the Hunters Association addressed the public, and reporters filled the screens with urgency. The Jisan prison escape, the incident that had thrown the country into turmoil, was nearing its end. Only a handful of fugitives remained unidentified. Thanks to the swift action of the Hunters Association, disaster had been contained before it could spiral out of control. But what drew the most attention was not the escape, it was the witness accounts. Civilians reported seeing a shadow shaped like a human fighting beside the hunters, saving countless lives others from destruction. After investigation, the association confirmed that the mysterious figure was tied to an E-rank hunter named Sung Suho. According to their official statement, Suho had arrived at the scene before anyone else, risking his life to protect others. In the moment of greatest peril, he had undergone what they described as a reawakening, a phenomenon where a hunter's dormant power re-emerged under extreme circumstances. It was said that through this event, he had gained the ability to shield others from harm, turning the tide of the battle and saving dozens of lives. The broadcast concluded by calling him a hero, a savior who had appeared in a time of crisis. As the screen flickered in the background, Suho frowned and pointed at it, his tone sharp with disbelief. The explanation was false, and he knew it. Chairman Jimchul's calm voice answered before anyone else could speak. He admitted that they had crafted the story themselves and sent it to the press. Though reawakening was rare, it was still plausible enough to be accepted by the public. He had no intention of deceiving Suho, but explained that the truth, the existence of a leveling hunter, could never be revealed. Anyone who stood beyond the system, beyond the rules of the world, would only invite fear and hostility. The moment Suho's true nature became known, chaos would follow. People would not see a protector, they would see an anomaly, a threat. Jimchul's words were final and heavy. Suho was different. He was the son of the Shadow Monarch, the heir to power unbound by limits. And in this fragile world, such existence could easily tip the balance between order and destruction. The chairman reminded him quietly of the 3 goals Suho had once mentioned, objectives that would determine the fate of the coming war. Suho spoke with steady resolve, laying out his plan. First, he must grow, level up until he could stand beside his father in battle. Second, he must gather hunters capable of resisting the outer gods and mobilize the world's forces. Third, he must hunt down and eliminate the apostle of the Atarim. Jong-in listened and tempered Suho's zeal with hard-earned caution, reminding him that marshaling the world required more than courage. It required careful public strategy and the ability to move people's hearts, not just their swords. Suho admitted inwardly that Jong-in was right. Alone, he lacked the means to achieve those goals and would have to borrow the strength of others. He looked at the room and read the unspoken answers. Baek's loyalty shone through as he pledged the White Tiger Guild's support, prideful and solemn at the legacy tied to Suho's name. Jong-in and the Hunters Guild, unable to stand idly by as the world faced annihilation, also promised to aid the effort, their resolve tempered by fear and duty. Chairman Woo Jimchul watched the shifting alliances with a calculating calm, grateful that Suho had persuaded key figures like Baek and Choi Jong-in to join the cause. Taegyu's suspicion cut through the gathering as he demanded to know whether Suho had killed Lee Min-sung. Baek's reflexive protectiveness flared at the accusation. Suho met the accusation with blunt clarity, acknowledging his responsibility. He revealed that Lee Min-sung had been under the Apostle's influence, corrupted by the star powder, and that Suho had confronted him to extract information after confirming his cooperation with the Atarim. Taegyu's suspicion hardened as he demanded to know why Lee Min-sung had sided with the Atarim, but Suho could offer no answer. The motive remained a blank between them. Taegyu's private conviction, however, quieted the accusation. His instincts told him Sung Suho had not acted in bad faith, making his earlier questioning feel unnecessary and oddly rueful. Suho recounted what he had seen in Min-sung's final moments. The man had been laughing. The image unsettled him, whether that laughter sprang from cruel satisfaction or from the hollow resignation of a life emptied of meaning. Suho could not say. What stayed with him was the sting of bitterness threaded through that sound, and despite everything, the undeniable fact that Min-sung had not entirely lost himself at the end. The memory left an unexpected lingering impression on Suho's mind. Taegyu exhaled, the sound carrying scorn and reluctant acceptance. He dismissed Min-sung as the same egotistical man he had always been, and announced that the Reaper Guild would join the effort. Chairman Jimchul watched the shifting allegiances with inward calculation. Suho's sincerity had secured the backing of 3 powerful guilds, and Jimchul couldn't help but notice a familiar spark in the young hunter, something that recalled Sung Jinu in the crucible of battle. The thought filled him with a mixture of anticipation and unease. He wondered what wins Suho's choices would bring to the Hunters Association. Suho steadied himself and prepared to outline the plan. In Jimchul's mind, the image crystallized into a darker premonition. The wind Suho summoned might well carry blood. Inside the Shadow Dungeon, training pushed to its limit. Ammut perched on Suho's back as Suho forced out the final sit-ups, sweat slick and muscles trembling. Each rep was a last-ditch bid to reach 100. When the final motion finished, the system's notification chimed. The daily quest to train to become a formidable combatant had been completed. Ammut watched him with quiet pride, noting how the trainee who had once struggled now executed the regimen alone. Suho flexed, admitting to a weight that only exercise could lift, and offered a brief wry word of praise to his companion. From the corner, Esil observed in reverent silence, recognizing the change in Suho, the monarch's bearing, the settled confidence in his body and voice, evidence of growth that reached beyond mere power. Suho rose and readied himself to leave, intent already pulling him outward. He had told the Hunters Association leaders the previous day that he would purge field-type dungeons across Korea to prevent the creation of star powder factories. They had balked at political fallout, but he had negotiated a condition and secured their uneasy cooperation. Now, responsibility called, and Suho stepped from the dungeon with a single purpose: fulfill the promise and tear down the places that birthed the apocalypse. Esil's determination flared as she stepped forward, insisting that she would help him. Her eyes shone with loyalty as she asked if he would summon them when the time came. Suho gave a firm nod, assuring her that he would call upon them whenever he needed their strength. Her voice softened, fading with unspoken emotion as he turned and left the shadow dungeon, his figure vanishing into the light. At the P-rank field-type dungeon, Kachisan Field, the atmosphere was tense. Hunters gathered, whispering among themselves. Miho's tone was edged with disbelief as she questioned the decision of their guild masters. Handing over the ownership of every field-type dungeon to a single individual was unthinkable, especially considering how it would cut into the guild's earnings. She wondered aloud who this hunter Sung Suho truly was, the man causing such disruption across the entire association. Her frustration deepened when she realized Suho hadn't even asked the A-rank or higher hunters to participate in clearing the D-rank field-type dungeon. He had only summoned them to fill up the ranks. Beside her, Sung Goon's curiosity replaced her skepticism. He found the young hunter intriguing. A man said to mine, strike and haul all on his own. He mused whether such rumors could possibly be true. Miho dismissed it as exaggeration, irritation creeping into her voice. Even her father had become caught up in Suho's story, speaking of memories from a past world she couldn't believe in. But Goon's gaze remained fixed on the dungeon. The words "a hunter who levels" echoed in his mind. He wanted to see for himself whether Choi Jong-in's claims about Suho held any truth. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. A low rumble spread across the valley as dust lifted from the earth. Dojin's instincts sharpened instantly. Something was happening inside. Miho looked around, alarmed, realizing the tremor was no ordinary quake. Goon muttered in disbelief that it hasn't even been an hour since he entered. Then, from the heart of the dungeon, the air split open with a surge of dark energy. Suho emerged from the depths. Behind him, the shadow soldiers followed in. Suho returned from the field with an army of shadows behind him and a calm confidence that filled the clearing. He had felled the boss quickly and spent the extra time mining and hauling the essence stones. The haul was enormous. Without hesitation, he announced his plan to clear 3 more sites that day and move on to the next field-type dungeon. Eyes already fixed on the work ahead, Miho stared at the mound of essence stones, disbelief tightening her throat. For a D-rank field to be stripped so thoroughly in an hour astonished her. The speed and efficiency of Suho's work left her wondering who this man truly was. In the Hunters Association, Choi Jong-in paced with a careful frustration, handing over control of all the field-type dungeons to a single individual gnawed at him. Those sites were a steady source of materials and earnings for the guilds after all. Bake answered coldly that such greed meant little if the Atarim succeeded and destroyed the world. Survival outranked profit. Jong-in admitted a grudging irony. The guild that had most vigorously pushed to entrust the dungeons to Suho turned out to be the association's largest master, and there was a trace of sympathy in his tone for the man's predicament. Lim Taegu, voice tight with resolve, reminded them that star powder factories were being built inside field-type dungeons, and that he would do anything to wipe out the stimulants that had corrupted Lee Min-sung. Jong-in's next thought was darker. What if the invaders beyond their world resembled the monsters of old? If that were true, could any plan, any alliance, truly stand against them? The question hung heavy in the chamber, and for a long, breathless moment, the association sat in stunned silence. Jimchul observed the growing unease in the room and broke the silence. He reminded everyone that their worry changed nothing. This was a threat they could not evade, no matter how deeply they wished to. And in his eyes, there was only one answer. Suho would be able to handle it. Yet beneath his calm, his thoughts turned to the storm that awaited them. Dissolving the guild's rights over field-type dungeons would ignite fierce opposition. Even among allies, resentment was inevitable. He recalled his earlier conversation with Jong-in. The older hunter had pointed out that individuals like Bake Miho or Park Dojin, those without memories of the past world, would never believe in a coming invasion from beyond the stars. Convincing them, he'd said, would be nearly impossible. Suho had only muttered one word: persuade. Jimchul had answered him then, sharing the only way he could see it done. There existed hunters known as national levels. Thomas Andre of the United States, Liu Zhigang of China, and Siddharth of India. Hunters whose power alone equaled that of entire nations, whose mere presence commanded the loyalty of others. If Suho could grow to such a height, or beyond, it would become the greatest persuasion of all. Suho had inhaled deeply, his expression resolute. He vowed to become a hunter powerful enough to sway the hearts of all others through sheer strength alone. Jimchul had simply nodded, telling him to focus on the battles before him. Now, in the conference room, the gathered guild leaders, Azure Cloud of Yongseo, Hwam of Yeongdong, and Daesung and Daechung of Hoseo, watched Suho in silent appraisal. A collective decision was reached. To fuel his growth, Suho would be granted full clearance of the field-type dungeons. He would clear them alone, mine the essence stones, and return them to their respective guilds as compensation. And so he began. One by one, the dungeons fell. Suho tore through swarms of beasts, his blades and shadows cutting paths through mana-filled terrain. Each victory sharpened his body, hardened his endurance, and drove his strength higher. Outside, as reports came in, the hunters could scarcely believe what they were hearing. Sung-gun turned to Miho, disbelief tightening his face. Miho's shock mirrored his own. In just 2 days, Suho had cleared and mined 8 dungeons, 2 D ranks, 4 C ranks, and 2 B ranks. Gun's gaze remained fixed on the aftermath of Suho's latest conquest, awe flickering in his voice as he spoke. What astonished him wasn't merely the feat of clearing every dungeon alone, but the palpable surge of mana radiating from Suho each time he emerged. It was undeniable now. There truly existed a hunter who could level up. Within the dungeon's fading shadows, Suho reflected quietly. His growth was measurable. Mana rank defined through MP, and he could feel his shadow authority flowing with increasing ease as his power expanded. From the darkness, Beru appeared and offered to measure Suho's mana against that of a nearby S-rank hunter, eager to gauge his progress. Suho's answer came calm and certain. There was no need. He already understood how vast the difference had become. He left the dungeon soon after and returned to his apartment, exhaustion settling over his body. But the moment he crossed the threshold, unease prickled at the edges of his senses. Something was wrong. The air was heavy, charged with killing intent. A cold voice emerged from the darkness, cruel and deliberate. It mocked him, lamenting that his family had not arrived first. The speaker had planned to make them suffer as he once had. Then, the intruder greeted him by name. Suho's expression sharpened as recognition struck. Hwang Dong-soo, one of Korea's strongest S-rank awakeners, the brother of Hwang Dong-suk, the ringleader of the Jisan prison incident. He remembered Jimchul's warning clearly. The chairman had shown him a photograph explaining that Dong-soo's ties to his brother ran deep, and rumors suggested he had orchestrated the prison break to free him. Now, with his brother dead and Suho hailed as the hero of the incident, Dong-soo's vengeance had found its target. Jimchul had offered guards for protection, but Suho had declined. He would stand on his own and flee only if he must. Suho faced him squarely, voice steady despite the threat before him. He understood why Dong-soo had come, but the truth weighed heavier than vengeance. It hadn't been Suho who killed Hwang Dong-suk, it was a man named Kang Tae-shik. Dong-soo's expression faltered for the briefest moment. Shock flickered in his thoughts as he realized the boy before him not only knew his name, but also the truth about Kang Tae-shik. Hwang Dong-soo's eyes glinted with cold hostility as he stepped forward, his tone laced with disdain. He made it clear he wasn't there for vengeance. His brother's death meant nothing compared to the fury of having his own plans ruined by someone like Suho. His pride had been wounded, and he had come to crush the one who had dared interfere. Suho's gaze hardened, his voice calm but edged with authority. Dong-soo was beyond reason, and there was no point in arguing within his home. He told him to move elsewhere, to settle this away from innocent lives. Dong-soo sneered, anger flashing as he barked back, refusing to take orders from someone he deemed beneath him. Suho's answer came in the form of action. His fist crashed through the wall, the sharp crack of concrete triggering the apartment's alarm system. A shrill wail filled the room, echoing through the halls. Suho turned to face Dong-soo once more, his tone steady and deliberate. His uncle was known to panic easily, he explained, and within minutes the place would be swarming with security forces and hunters. Dong-soo's lips curved into a feral grin, amusement flickering through his rage. With a low, mocking laugh, he spat a curse under his breath, calling Suho a brat, but one worth breaking. They left the building and walked through the night until they reached an abandoned factory, the wind carrying the faint scent of rust and dust. Under the broken skylights, the silence between them thickened. Dong-soo's eyes narrowed as he studied Suho's calm composure. He admitted, almost grudgingly, that the rumors of Suho's reawakening must be true. No ordinary hunter could face him without trembling. He asked if Suho had achieved S rank. Suho's tone was neutral as he replied that his rank hadn't yet been reassessed, but his focus was elsewhere. He wanted to know how Dong-soo had obtained the star fragments. Dong-soo let out a mocking laugh at the question, his grin sharp and dismissive. He asked if Suho needed stimulants, his words dripping with derision. That substance was rare, hard to find in these times. Suho's thoughts flickered with unease. If Dong-soo wasn't receiving them from the Atarim, then another source was feeding their spread. Removing his glasses, Dong-soo's gaze sharpened with raw power. His mana flared, swirling with intensity. He called stimulants a crutch for the weak, claiming that true hunters relied only on strength earned through battle. He looked at Suho with predatory delight, his voice cold and sure as he promised to to teach him the truth. Not all S ranks were the same, and he would prove it. Suho steadied his breath, eyes narrowing as he studied the man before him. Hwang Dong-soo's presence radiated power far greater than that of Lee Min-sung, his first true clash against an S rank, and deep within, a spark of anticipation stirred. He wanted to see how far he had come. He lunged forward like a hawk diving for its prey, his fist coiled tight with mana as he aimed for the first strike, but Dong-soo reacted instantly. His heel slammed into the ground, and the earth itself erupted. A spear of jagged rock burst upward, slamming into Suho's gut and throwing him off balance. Air escaped his lungs in a sharp gasp as pain rippled through him. Dong-soo rolled his shoulders and cracked his knuckles, mocking amusement flickering in his grin. He taunted Suho for daring to face him head-on when he was supposedly a summoner-type hunter, telling him to summon that dark human of his instead. Before Suho could retort, Dong-soo's fist came down like a hammer, shattering the rocks beneath him. The shockwave sent Suho hurtling backward, crashing hard into the ground before sliding to a stop. Dust billowed around him as he rose again. Dong-soo didn't wait. In a blur of movement, he closed the distance, his grin spreading wider. His punches came in a flurry, each blow heavy enough to break concrete, shattering debris as he advanced. Suho slipped sideways just in time, the strike grazing past his chest. With a sharp pivot, he twisted his body and countered, his heel arcing upward in a clean, powerful kick that connected squarely with Dong-soo's head. Dong-soo's head jerked slightly, but he straightened immediately, unflinching, eyes alight with feral excitement. He unleashed a storm of blows, each faster and heavier than the last, driving Suho backward with raw force. The younger hunter's arms trembled under the relentless impact as he blocked, the ground cracking beneath his feet. Dong-soo's words dripped with contempt as he barked that strength alone would never be enough, that even if Suho used every ability at his disposal, he couldn't possibly win. Suho gritted his teeth, absorbing the barrage. The difference in power was undeniable. Dong-soo's physical might was immense, yet something was different. Suho could sense it clearly. That suffocating pressure, that overwhelming dread he had once felt facing true monsters, it wasn't here. He had grown. Dong-soo's smirk widened as he noticed the flicker of thought in Suho's eyes. He mocked him for trying to act cocky mid-fight. Then his next punch landed like thunder. The strike connected with Suho's chest, detonating through him with explosive force. Suho's body shot through the air like a missile, crashing through wall after wall, debris scattering in every direction until he finally slammed into the far end of the factory, leaving a crater in the shattered concrete. Dong-soo's grin froze as pain shot through his arm. He glanced down to see a jagged blade of shadow piercing cleanly through his hand. His expression twisted with fury as he snarled, demanding when Suho had managed to draw a weapon. From the shifting darkness, Beru's voice echoed. He asked if Suho was unharmed. Suho exhaled slowly, his body steady despite the bruises and dust coating him. He admitted inwardly that fighting an enhancement type S rank without any of his abilities was still beyond reach. His opponent's brute force far outweighed his unaugmented strength. Part of him wanted to pour every saved point into raw power, but priorities lay elsewhere. His gaze sharpened with calm determination. It was time to stop holding back. Shadows rippled around him like a storm unleashed. In seconds, the darkness condensed and shaped itself into armor, massive and imposing, each plate gleaming with a faint, otherworldly glow. The air trembled as mana thickened, and Suho's form took on the weight of something far beyond mortal strength. The system's notification flickered before him. Shadow item creation complete. Minotaur helm, Crimson Mane cuirass, Cockatrice pauldron, Kira, Lizardman boots. Each piece radiated rare grade energy, amplifying his strength, speed, and intellect in unison. A cold glint flickered in Suho's eyes as he declared that he would now fight with his full strength. Dong-soo laughed, though the sound carried a note of unease. He mocked Suho, claiming armor wouldn't change anything, that trinkets couldn't tip the scales between them. But even as he spoke, his gaze narrowed. There was something unnatural about those shadows, something familiar. Then he saw it, the dark ripple that shimmered along Suho's armor. It was the same as that of him. A memory tore open inside Dong-soo's mind, raw and vivid. Above him, Sung Jinwoo had stood atop a high building, his voice cold as steel. He reminded Dong-soo of the greed that had consumed him in death, almost mocking how fitting it was for someone like Hwang Dong-soo. The words echoed again, twisting through his spine like a knife. The memory he had buried deep clawed its way back into the present. He remembered it all, his death at the hands of the Shadow Monarch. Rage and terror mingled in his eyes as he looked upon Suho, the son of that same man. Suho, meanwhile, flexed his gauntleted hands, feeling the unfamiliar weight of the armor. It wasn't his style. Too flashy, too heavy, too cumbersome. Suho's gaze sharpened as the change in Dong-soo became unmistakable. The man's composure crumbled, his expression contorted with confusion and pain as his hands clawed desperately at his head. A low, guttural sound escaped him as flashes of memory tore through his mind. The world around him blurred, replaced by fragments of a distant battle. The shadow of a man standing tall above the fallen, his eyes cold and unyielding. Images struck like lightning. He could see himself again, broken and defeated. united, standing before that same man, Sung Jinwoo. The name erupted from the depths of his memory, tearing through the haze of his madness. In that instant, he remembered everything. The power, the humiliation, the day his pride was crushed beneath the Shadow Monarch's gaze. Suho, watching in silence, felt unease coil in his chest. He did not understand how Hwang Dong-soo could possibly know his father's name, but before he could ponder further, Beru appeared from the veil of darkness beside him, his tone grim and knowing. The truth came clear. Hwang Dong-soo had once lived as Greed, a fallen hunter who in the previous world had been slain by Sung Jinwoo and reborn as one of his shadow soldiers. Now those memories had resurfaced. The black mana surrounding Suho had awakened something buried deep within Dong-soo's soul. The echoes of the past life had clawed their way back to the surface, dragging him into the nightmare he thought long forgotten. Dong-soo's thoughts spiraled into fury. The sight of the young hunter, cloaked in shadows that mirrored his former master's power, reignited the shame he had buried. He recalled the photograph in Suho's home, the faces of a family connected by blood to the man who had once enslaved him. It all fell into place. The boy before him was Sung Jinwoo's son. Rage consumed him. The realization twisted every thought into venom. Why was the Shadow Monarch not standing before him now? Why did the monster who had once ruled over all remain silent in this world? If Jinwoo was trapped or weakened, then this was his moment. The vengeance he had craved across lifetimes could finally be claimed. Mana erupted from Dong-soo's body like wildfire, shaking the ground beneath him. He charged forward, his blows striking with the fury of a man driven by hatred alone. Suho met each strike with disciplined precision, blocking and countering, though the force behind them cracked the walls and tore through the ground. Inside Dong-soo's mind, the fury only grew. Every flicker of shadow, every motion of Suho's power reminded him of the chains that had once bound him. The memories of groveling before the Shadow Monarch burned in his veins. He could still feel the cold darkness that had consumed him, turning him into a servant against his will. Humiliation and wrath fused into one as he fought with unrelenting madness. The past and present merged. The once proud hunter who had bowed before Sung Jinwoo now sought revenge upon his bloodline. The battlefield shook beneath his rage as he poured everything into a single consuming purpose. He would erase that shadow's legacy with his own hands, and by the end of this battle, the son of Sung Jinwoo would fall. Suho met Dong-soo's onslaught with a steady defense, his arms a wall against the fury hurled at him. As Dong-soo faltered, a storm of shadow-forged weapons coalesced around Suho. Blades, spears, and jagged shards that spun and danced in obedient arcs. He snatched them from the void and drove them into Dong-soo from every angle, each strike finding flesh and opening crimson rents across the S-ranker's body. Pain and surprise contorted Dong-soo's features as he realized the boy before him had leapt forward in strength. The shadows Suho wielded were not mere tricks, but the accumulated armory of countless field-type dungeons, items whose stat-boosting effects and the summoning mechanism itself had been absorbed and integrated into Suho's battlecraft. With ruthless efficiency, Suho emptied his arsenal and carved through every opening, blood pouring from wounds that multiplied with each sweep. From the darkness, Beru watched with fierce pride. He felt the young monarch grow in real time, not only a rise in level, but a refinement of tactics and skill that escaped simple measurement. Impulsively, Beru reached out with his mind toward his liege, certain that soon the Shadow Monarch would witness the progress of his heir. Dong-soo dropped to his knees, blood slicking the concrete beneath him. Rage and disbelief warred inside him as he assessed the gulf between expectation and reality. The boy's sudden power exceeded his forecasts. Forced to retreat not from cowardice, but from calculated preservation, Dong-soo planned in the depths of his hurt. He would regroup, wait, and prepare. He would not accept this defeat as final. He would return with ambushes and threats, strike at Suho's life when vigilance waned, and strike through those closest to him. Strength alone would not guarantee safety, he convinced himself. The war he intended to wage would be waged in patience and cruelty. As Hwang Dong-soo staggered away, clutching his wounds, a shadow moved silently above him, swift, cold, and absolute. The ground trembled a heartbeat later as Suho descended from the sky like a meteor. The impact tore through the abandoned site, scattering debris and splitting the earth beneath the force of his landing. When the dust began to clear, two figures emerged from the haze. Suho stood tall amid the shattered terrain, his dagger already buried deep in Dong-soo's chest. The once proud S-rank hunter knelt before him, gasping, his breath ragged and broken. Blood dripped steadily from his lips as he stared up at Suho with hatred still burning behind his eyes. Even in defeat, his voice came out in fractured defiance, bitter and trembling. He swore that if Suho intended to turn him into a slave, as his father once had, he would resist with every breath left in his body. He would kill both of them if it meant erasing the humiliation carved into his soul. Suho's expression remained calm, his tone laced with quiet disdain. It was a pitiful dream, he thought. Dong-soo could not even overcome him, yet still spoke of reaching Sung Jinwoo. The notion was nothing but arrogance born of desperation. He told him to try if he dared, though even that seemed beyond him now. Dong-soo's voice broke into a final hoarse scream of rage. His cry cry echoing through the ruins. Suho's name spat out like venom. Then, silence. The dagger moved once more, clean and decisive. A sharp sound split the air, followed by the dull thud of a lifeless body collapsing to the ground. Blood scattered across the cracked concrete, painting the ruin in deep crimson. Thanks for watching. Like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Until next time, happy watching.